Hi there, my name is Eric Luce with Proof+Geist. In this video, I'd like to show you how to set up the NextAuth FileMaker adapter for your Next.js projects. This will allow you to connect any Next.js website with your FileMaker server, and you can have your users and roles all built in directly to your FileMaker server with easy web authentication on the front end. All right, to get started, I'm actually going to look at the NextAuth sample repo, and we're going to start here. So if you're following along with me, then this is our example app. This gives us a couple things to get started. It tells us to clone the project. So I'm going to click this command here, and then back in my terminal, I'm going to paste that command. And now I'm going to cd, change my directory into that thing. And then we're going to do an npm install. This is standard for setting up any basic web app. Now, next thing we need to do is configure our local environment. So it tells you to copy their example file into here. So let me do that real quick. And then just so I can see it in a more visual way, I'm going to type code and then period, which will open the current directory I'm in my VS Code editor. Perfect. Now I can close out this window. All right, so now what I have here is the example local file as well as my own local file. I go ahead and make my own settings here, but basically what you're going to want to do is set up some other authentication provider for you to use. I'm actually going to use email and Google for this. There's documentation here if you go to the NextAuth website and you go to providers, there's a whole bunch of different login providers that you can use. So pick which one works best for you and then come back and set it up with your secrets here. I'm going to go ahead and copy mine over. The one thing that you are going to want to add, though, is some environment variables for your FileMaker username and password. This is how you're going to connect to your FileMaker server. If you're following along with my example file, then you'll have this NextAuth demo, and I will show you in the security features here. I've already set up a username and password for FMRest. So FMRest is the username and the password. And if I look at my privilege set, you have to make sure this is already done in this file, but it has the access via FileMaker data API needs to be enabled. So I've set all this up in this file, and if you are following along with this file, just upload this to your own server, and then you'll need to connect it to your server URL. Now, since I'm using the email provider, you'll notice if you read through the documentation here that it requires the node mailer package. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this command as well. I'm going to add the node mailer into my project. And the other thing that I'm going to do is if I look at the NextAuth adapter, we're going to need the NextAuth and NextAuth FileMaker. This is already installed, so I'm just going to install the NextAuth adapter FileMaker here, npm install, and we're going to install the FileMaker adapter. All right, so we've already added, if you're using the sample file, the NextAuth schema is already added to the file, so you don't need to worry about any of this, but basically these are the 4 tables. We'll go through that after I show you how to set it all up. And the next step is we need to actually add this to our nextauth.js, or in this case, TS file. This tutorial, the sample project we're using does use TypeScript, but there's really nothing too different than JavaScript in this, so don't let that scare you at all. All right, so this is what comes in the sample file. You can go ahead and delete whatever you're not using. So for example, we're going to delete all this commented out code. Under the providers, these are which login providers are you going to use. I am going to use the Google provider, so I'll leave that one there just to show you. But whichever ones you're using, make sure you remove those. And then I do want to use my email provider, and I'll copy that over. All right, so there's my email provider here. Email provider may need to be imported, so here we got to import from the providers here, and then I'll go ahead and just, again, delete whichever pieces I don't need. So under the login providers, you can log in via email or log in via Google. So this is all good here. Let me just close this so we get a little bit more room. All right, so those are our providers configured, but now we need to configure our FileMaker adapter. So I'm going to import the FileMaker adapter from the package we just installed. And then I'm going to copy this object, and we're eventually going to add the adapter right next to our providers. So at the same level as our providers would be, right? So, all right. Now, if you have auto installed on your FileMaker server, you can use an API key, or you can just use username and password. So I'll set it up like so. What you may need to do if you're using environment variables, if you get any TypeScript errors in your project, is you may have to use this kind of syntax, which says if this variable does not exist, use an empty string. Otherwise, it might get upset and say, hey, this was requiring a string. So if you use this is kind of a shorthand to say if this doesn't exist, use a string instead. And likewise for my server and database, I'm going to use those environment variables. So when you make your env.local file, you're going to make sure you need to include a FileMaker username, password, database, and server if you're following this exactly. Or for some of these things, you can hard code them in, but it's always a good practice to keep them in environment variables so that they don't accidentally get leaked or anything like that. The database is going to be the name of the file. So in our case, that is this next_auth_demo. And for the server, it's going to be the URL, including HTTPS, for whatever your FileMaker server is. So now that we've got that set up, we've passed it to NextAuth using the adapter here. And so now let's see if we can get this working. So I've got this all saved. I'm going to open up my terminal again, and I'm going to run npm run dev. And let's see if we get started. All right, looks like my server is started here. So now in a browser, I can go to localhost 3000. And here's my sample website. This is all the code provided by NextAuth, so there's going to be lots of examples here on how to integrate this further into your application. Let's go ahead and try to sign in, see if we can get any problems here. So I can click sign in with Google or sign in with email. And let me first show you, if I look in our FileMaker file, this is our users layout. There's no users in our solution. I've done this purge database, so everything is totally clear. And let me do this sign in with Google. So it's going to click on this. And since I've already authorized this app with Google, it actually just brings me right back in. It brings in my picture, it brings in my thing. And if you notice right here, it actually created my user account in my FileMaker server. It found my email, it found my name, all from Google. The ID token, this is a JSON web token that includes more data about that. You don't necessarily have to know what all these do, but these are all just stored here. And here's my session. Now, since FileMaker stores your session, you can actually, if you hit this delete icon, I will delete my session from the database, and this will actually force sign me out the next time that I check what my session is. So in my case, if I just refresh the page, and depending on if it's cached or not, you have to do it a couple times. Let me click on this API, which will try to load it. So it still thinks I'm signed in. Maybe I didn't commit the record. Let me click a bit here, and then refresh again. There we go, now I'm signed out. So once this is one of the benefits of using FileMaker is FileMaker stores your sessions and you can say, I don't want this to happen anymore. Now having FileMaker store your sessions can be problematic. We'll get to that in a little bit. Anyway, let me sign in again, and this time I'll sign in with my email address. So if I type my just email address in here, I just got a little shortcut for that. I'll click sign in with email. And I get this, okay, check your email. A sign-in link has been sent to your email address. So this email works by whatever email server that you sent to. So if I look back at my VS Code, you'll see that I had to pass in an email host, port, username, and password. So this is whatever SMTP server that you have, but you can use this through Mailgun, SendGrid, all kinds of email services. So this sends me that stuff, and then here's a link that says sign in. I'll click sign in, open it in Chrome. And now once again, here I'm signed in. It actually found my username and my email because it knew that it was the same email as I used for Google. And if I refresh here, you can see there's the same session. And I could do the same thing, delete the session, and come back through. Now here's where this gets really, really powerful. So not only have I done a super easy way to log into my web application, but this is connected to FileMaker, and let me show you how. This right here, API example, this is the data that you're going to get in your web app for the user. This is just by default what it's going to give you, but you can actually customize this. So if I went down here into these callbacks, this is all part of the NextAuth documentation, and I add an async function for the session. Okay, we're going to add a function here, and I want to pull out the session that it passes in, and I want the user account. And then I'm going to return the session. So this is the function that says every time I ask for the session, what do you want it to be? And I can add anything I want to this object. So I can say session.test equals test. And now if I save this and I refresh this page, what you'll see is I've got a user and I've got my test key here. So what if this user account, what if I could pull from FileMaker what that is? Session.user equals user. Okay, and what you'll see is now it's going to pull whatever my user record is from FileMaker and pulls it into my web app. So let me refresh this. And now the user object has a lot more features in here. And let me show you where this is coming from. This is using the pure data API. So if I click API layout, this is the layout that all these things are coming from. There's a couple required fields that you need to have. There's some suggested fields that aren't technically required but are always good to have. And then these are the optional fields. These is part of your user table. If I go in here and I want to add a different field, I have this field in here called role. I could add this to the API layout. I could remove these other fields. Let's say I don't need them anymore. Hit save and then go back to browse mode. There's no role in this particular person. So let me go back to users, give myself a role of best admin or whatever your role system might need to be. And now if I come back to my web app and I refresh, I can see I no longer have those creation timestamps, but I do have this role down here of my user record. And that's where this becomes super, super powerful because this is all coming in from your FileMaker database directly. Now, let me talk about a couple caveats. This default method, if you were to build this into your web app directly, there are a couple caveats, and that has to do with optimizing your FileMaker server. The biggest drawback is that this is using a session-based login by default, which means that every single time the web app wants to know, is this user logged in, it's going to make a FileMaker data API call to read from your database and make sure that this session variable has not expired. Or that it's still there. If you deleted it, for example, and committed the record, then it's going to be totally gone. So in order to optimize how many hits you're doing on your FileMaker server, you have a couple different options, which I've outlined here. So the first option, which is the easiest to configure, is JWT, which means that instead of using database sessions, you can have it store in the browser a token that expires after a certain amount of time, and that token can be validated, make sure that it hasn't been changed, and that's how you can tell if someone is logged in. Super easy. You can still use it with just FileMaker, no other services, but you can't do that cool thing where I can delete this session and no longer return the user. So let me show you real quick how to set that up. In here in the NextAuth settings, you have to go to strategy, session stat, and then this is just the keys, strategy, JWT. Okay, and that's all there is to it to add this feature. So let me go ahead and purge the database so you can see the distinction here. So I've just deleted all the records and all the tables. And now let me go and refresh this. I'm not going to be signed in, so let me sign in. Let me sign in with Google again. Okay, and I'm still signed in, but what you'll see now is that I do not have a session. I am still storing my user account in FileMaker, and you know that I'm logging in via Google. But I don't have a session. My session is this JSON web token over here. So this data is coming directly from Google, and I can't really change what this is. This test key you see is just coming in directly. So you'd have to find some other way to pull that in. And then, like I said, there's no way to actually log you out. So in fact, this button is kind of broken. That's weird. So let me just go to API auth sign out and sign out again here. So that's the database session. The other option you can do is this Redis cache, which is a bit advanced for this video, but I do just want to point that out, that is an option if you want to store your database sessions in Redis. So this FileMaker package that we've released here will natively support the Upstash Redis host. So it'll automatically cache your sessions and your verification tokens in Upstash so that you can use that for your sessions, which is much faster and doesn't hit the FileMaker data API. But then you can still use your sessions, and you can integrate with whatever's in your user layout object, like I said before. So this is our preferred method, but it is a bit more advanced. I hope this tutorial was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments, and we look forward to connecting with you.